So I know we see the word communication a lot in here, and we are going to talk about this, but I'm going to spoiler alert, this is a lot about change management, if we're being honest with one another. So let's jump in. So first is, I like to think about this as sort of a 3-act play, so bear with me. Act 1, we're going to talk about effectively the problem statement, how we solved it, and then ultimately where we're going from there. So first off, what is this organizational chasm that I'm referring to? We're at a developer productivity conference. So let me tell you how I identified this. It all begins with, you've heard this all week, the survey. So we run a survey every single quarter for all of our developers to fill out, and we ask them questions all across the SDLC and ultimately want to gather the sentiment for whether or not they're feeling productive across each of these tools and processes. Great. Okay. Once that survey closes, we do a huge amount of analysis. One of the things that we do is what we call correlate or driver analysis, where we look at each of these individual questions and understand how they affect the overall DSAT score that we calculate, because that changes over time. Like if I would have rewound 2 years ago and you would have said top 3 problems, one of them I would have said documentation, top 3. That's one of the things that affects DevProd the most. Per this analysis today, not even a factor, right, to our overall sentiment. So this changes. But one of the things that we also do is we ask for open text feedback, because realistically, all of our survey questions don't encapsulate the entire developer experience. So we prompt you, tell us what would make it better for you. And once we get all of these comments and about, 1 in 4 developers comments, so we get something like, say, 1,500 comments. We go through all of them. A human actually reads every single one of them, but we also, as you can imagine, use AI to categorize and analyze all of the sentiment and give us an understanding of some of these topics and themes. Okay, sound familiar? Are we all doing something along these lines? So we don't ask questions about everything, right? I mentioned that before. So when we were looking at this question, what could be done to better support developer productivity at Atlassian? Big open text after that. Does anyone want to guess what the number 1 problem was? Go for it. That would make sense, right? Especially at this conference, right? That would have been my guess too, in fairness. Sorry, it's not, but it's a very good guess. It's number 2. Planning, prioritization, and communication were actually coming through. And that was not something we explicitly asked about. That comes through as the most referenced problem or set of topics in the comments, right? That over a quarter of our developers are leaving. I'm going to show you a graphic. Don't freak out. It's all red, okay? I don't know if this is true for all of you, but for us, those developers who do leave comments, the vast majority of them are not happy. They're not going, thank you so much for fixing my DevProd today. They're going, it's broken right? So it's a lot of red when I hit next. Boom, now you believe me? Planning, prioritization, communication. The biggest, meaning the most volume of comments, and you can see pretty red, okay? Not great, not great. So what do I think of first as a software engineer? Not my problem. Right? That's what I thought. I was like, oh, this feels like a, program manager, TPM sort of problem to solve. I'll support them however I can. But as you start reading some of these comments, like for example, what I have seen that impedes my developer productivity is these requests for fixing things or vuln patching or something that constantly is coming top down, no warning, go do it, get it done today, right? Get it done this week. And this realistically, as you can see, was not just a one-off sort of occurrence. This was becoming a very big trend that we were observing over time. Another example comment, again, better communicated top-down directives. Very disruptive to our project planning and timelines. This is what is making us unproductive. This is what we kept hearing over and over and over again when we were starting our survey and starting our developer productivity efforts. So to summarize, thousands and thousands of comments in 4 words, asks coming in sideways. This was a huge problem for our engineering teams. So I went and ignored it, right? Okay, next quarter comes along, big theme. I'm gonna ignore it, right? Builds are a problem, documentation's a problem, all these other things are a problem. I'm gonna ignore it. But it kept coming up. It kept being our number 1 theme. So I started talking to a lot of folks around the company. Are you experiencing this? Everyone says, yes, right? And when I talk to folks like Rodrigo, right, who is, a bunch of my coworkers are in here, so I apologize. I'm going to be like pointing at randos all throughout this. He's head of engineering for a platform team, right? I'm going like, why are we not hitting our goals? Why have they not adopted our thing? Or why has our change not gotten to 100%? And he's going, well, Rebecca, it's not so easy, you know. I'm a platform team. Everything I do is cross-cutting. That means I have, in order for me to make DevProd better or make reliability better across all the products, I have to go deal with every single product and every single service team. And I need them to adopt this thing and get their code and put it in their code. But first, I can't even get their attention, right? I'm spamming them in all of these different ways. I'm trying to get this ask in front of them so they even have awareness that this is coming and that there's a timeline associated with it. And they couldn't even like get past that, let alone to drive the action, right? So then I was like, all right, I empathize. I'm also a platform builder. I agree. It is all those products' fault, right? So then I go and talk to our product teams, right? And I go, Preeti, head of engineering, why have you not done the thing I asked you to do? We need to re-platform off Bitbucket data center and get everybody to Bitbucket cloud. I need to put all these security controls in one place, not everywhere. I need to improve productivity in one place, not everywhere. And she goes, oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I go, I asked you to do this 2 years ago. When did you ask me to, right? Have we had this conversation before? Does this sound very familiar, right? I mean, I'm going to make it sound like it's this solved problem, but at the very end, you're going to see it's a work in progress. And let me tell you this too much noise thing. Whew, last night, I get added to a channel. 1,500 people in it. At channel, everyone, you need to migrate this thing by the end of the week or else. I look at the thing and I go, I don't own that thing. And they go, our bad, we just tagged everybody who looked at the dashboard last. Oops, not the people who own, right? Noise, right? So this is not by any means a perfectly solved problem, but we have made a huge amount of progress that I'm going to be talking about. And then of course there's the, okay, great. I get that you didn't hear about this ask, but like seriously, I need you to migrate by the end of the year or else. And then what does the product team tell me? But my roadmap, right? The things I already committed to our customers. So it's this constant push and pull and push and pull between our enabling teams and our product organizations and our product teams, right? That are trying to ultimately deliver better products and features to our customers. Therein lies the chasm. So how do we build a bridge between product and platform? So this was the question that we had in our heads for a while. And again, we look at this and we go, there's a lot of people things, there's a lot of process things, there's also some technology things that we could do to make this better. But we're a bunch of software engineers, so what do? We solve this with software, right? So first thing, for us to really attack this problem, the thing that we needed to actually do is accept something up front. Changes aren't going to go away. Maybe for your organization, but at least for ours, they're not. Right? We have a lot of things happening at the same time. Engineering health, right? I'm repping my shirt today. Engineering health, very important, right? Like, are your dependencies up to date? Guess what? JDK 25 is coming. Ha! 2/3 of our company is still on JDK 17. I need to get them to 21 before 17's end of life. Time is ticking, right? All of these types of engineering health things. Developer productivity. Cool, we just looked at all the metrics, we did all this analysis. Your team's pipelines are in the bottom 10% of the whole company. How can we get you to improve them, right? By the way, your codebase has the worst flaky tests I've ever seen. How do I get you to, those types of conversations? Reliability, right? This is another, cross-cutting theme for us. How do we make our products more reliable? How do I get you to adopt progressive rollouts or canary analysis? Things like this. Customer trust. For us, we're we're an organization that's very large and we want to continue to grow. So that means we need to continue moving up market, which means more and more regulated customers, right? All of the banks, all the NASAs of the world, right? Like we want them to use our cloud products. That means that we need to achieve an abundance of compliance certifications, which all require everybody to do work, right? And then of course, to make all of these things cheaper, we also want to standardize. Because you already heard me complaining about, oh, I gotta invest in all these things to make DevProd better. Well, one of the things that I can do is, I know it's painful, nobody likes this, but like get everybody onto the golden path, right? One tool chain across the SDLC where possible, and get everybody on it, right? Because when we started this whole program, we had multiple CI pipeline, right? Multiple version controls, multiple ways to do all of this, and it makes it very, very expensive when it comes to driving some of these changes. So we aligned, you've probably heard this term already this week, campaign. We aligned on this idea of a campaign as the noun, right, or the thing that we want people to do, and we wanted to tie that across everything, right? I'm going to tell you what I mean by everything in just a second. So a campaign is this, the way we define it is this concerted effort to drive change. Generally speaking, when I talk about this today, this is a technical change to systems or software, right? Effectively, you're changing your code. Each campaign is generally based on some sort of an engineering standard, right? That we've defined, and now we want you to go and meet these requirements or go and meet this bar. And it's also comprised of practices of how we want you to do it, right? And then, of course, measurement, verifying that the change happened and that we're now compliant with whatever the standard is. So really, there's a couple problems that we're solving for. One is our standards aren't really well understood. They're not really easily accessible, and they're not very well defined, because even when people know that this ask is happening, they still don't know what to do. So that's one problem. The second one is that each of these little bubbles or domains, whatever you want to think of them as, they keep reinventing the wheel every single time it's time to drive a change. Oh, last time we created 1,000 Jira tickets, didn't work. Let's try something different this time. Or worse, they just keep doing the thing that's not working. And so what ends up happening is if you're Preeti, the head of engineering for a product, you go, I don't even know where to look, right? I'm getting Slack messages, I'm getting Jira tickets, I'm getting, alerts in my reports. Where am I supposed to find that this thing's coming from? And of course, again, everybody doing it a different way just exacerbates the problem. So campaigns became, effectively for us, this ubiquitous language for driving change, and ultimately the steel thread across all of our underlying engineering systems that I'm going to go through. And we used it to establish this common process for driving changes across our engineering organization. And we want, of course, all of our engineering changes to follow the same process. So in a way, we're kind of defining a standard for standards, if you will, if you'll allow me that. And having this common process ultimately gives us a couple of big benefits, mostly being that we stop thrashing our teams. Right? We stop these sideways asks coming in last minute, and that we have proper prior planning to prevent piss poor performance, right? We all know our 7 Ps. Okay, maybe just me. I like a good acronym. And then we also want to have a consistent bar for these changes. We want it to be able to confidently say, yes, we were successful in doing this, and each of these changes is of high quality. Engineers know what to do, they're well prepared, and so on. So this became a really systematic way for us to drive improvements across the company and do so in a very effective manner. So when we were looking at what does this take to drive change, I'm very much oversimplifying it, but we kind of group things into these big 3 buckets. The first thing is scoping. I need everybody to be FIPS compliant. Who's everybody? No idea, right? That's usually how it starts. So then you go, okay, well, what are the characteristics? What are the attributes? How do we figure out who the cohort is, right? That ultimately we need to drive this change. Great, now that we understand the attributes or the description of how to, basically write a SQL query, who now owns those systems that we've identified as being in scope? Measurement, great. Now that we have a good understanding of the things that are in scope, the question is actually, are they in scope? Because they might already be compliant, and nothing is more annoying than being told to do something you already did, right? Or worse, being told to do something you don't have to do, right? That's not actually in scope for you, that causes busy work or causes more thrashing on the team. So we needed to make sure that our targeting and our scoping was very, very accurate, right? So we needed to understand what components are meeting the bar and which are not. And then, of course, very, very importantly, we need to communicate. We need to notify this cohort about the change and drive action. So I'm going to say the very hand-wavy thing that sort of ties together our thesis. We want to be able to provide the right insight at the right time, to the right person in the right place to do the right thing, right? Easy, no problem. Okay. Now that we're done with the marketing nonsense, just kidding. One more slide on marketing nonsense. So, just kidding, Julian. This is a beautiful slide. One of our product managers drew this. I could never. My Figma skills are not that good. So all credit to Julian for this gorgeous diagram. So what we ultimately called this whole system of work that we created was our Inch Health flywheel. All right. We built this flywheel to help teams, when they're building a new service, start healthy, right? You're already on the golden path, you're already compliant, you get everything free right out of the box. And if you're not, we help you get there, get on the golden path, get healthy, meet the bar, this proverbial bar. And then most importantly, once you're there, stay there. We all probably heard Abhi earlier talking about this idea of like the healthcare system. Oh my gosh, when he said that, I was like, great, I'm literally wearing a shirt that says Inch Health and I'm about to make a metaphor that's exactly that, right? Which is how we think about this. We think about this quite literally like a bit of a healthcare system. We want to, when something is not right, be able to diagnose that. And then we want to be able to prescribe a way to get better. And we also want you to be investing constantly in preventative health. Right? You're always going and making sure that your systems stay up to date. And that is what we consider our core health loop for our engineering flywheel. So this is what it looks like kind of from a abstract systems diagram perspective. Also, all credit to Jillian for this diagram. So let me walk you through it. There's a lot going on here. So first, let's start with campaigns. I circled something called campaigns and then something called tech ops. So I'm going to start at the end and then work my way back. Campaign. So this is, first thing is a team gets notified that they're in scope. Hey, you need to do something, right? And then they can go drill into that and see what that something is. So there's a couple of places that you can see this. First is in our developer portal, right? You can go into Compass. You can see this very easily associated with your component that you own. But we also start surfacing this early on in your team's tech ops report. So tech ops is a fortnightly ritual that we do to make sure that our teams are healthy, that they're staying on top of the system health, that they're triaging things that are coming in, and so on. So we will start surfacing that this campaign is coming, sometimes very far in advance, right, through these tech ops. And then, of course, we use this to reinforce that through this ritual that teams are conducting. So let's take a quick glance at a screenshot and then move on. This is a very, again, kind of a high level view. You can drill into each of these campaigns a little bit, but this is looking at it from a team's point of view for their health of the components they own. So you can see in this case, we have a couple of different components. We have the UI as well as the backend called Dragonfruit here. And we can see that they are, in some cases, totally compliant. They don't need to do anything. Everything's wonderful. In other cases, they are not meeting the bar, and that's where they need to focus their attention before it's due, right? And then, of course, you can click into that and they'll see all of the different criteria, which are requirements that are there and descriptive with links to the documentation, those practices of how to fulfill them. All right, that was the end state. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. So the first thing is you go, I'm going to drive a change. Cool. Well, I might have, helped with this system and Rodrigo's organization might own this system, but we are not the domain experts for every single thing that needs to happen across the company. So we need to work very closely with other platform teams and organizations who are those domain experts. One of our key stakeholders very early on was actually our security team, believe it or not. The team that, likes to just come with the hammer and say, do it, we don't care. They actually wanted to partner on a better way to drive change across Atlassian. Amazing. I'm not a security expert. So they need to help me define what those requirements are that engineering teams need to ultimately meet. We call this our intake funnel, right? It's just a really simple phrasing for that, but that is effectively that definition of what we want the developers to do. So to succeed, we cannot, of course, do that without having good adoption adherence, but that begins with defining clear requirements, accurate attribution, and of course, measurable impact. So we have to lead with data. We want to understand that teams, know what to prioritize and how to prioritize this work against other work, and impact. Why are we doing this in the first place? why is this important? How does this actually help the bottom line of the business or help achieve whatever this objective is? So without this, we can't really have sufficient discussions on ROI or trade-offs or frankly prioritization without really understanding what the point is. And so many ways, going back to like kindergarten writing class, who, what, when, where, why, how, right? It's really back to basics in many ways, but often when you get asked to do a thing, migrate to Kubernetes, none of these are actually defined for you. It just says, do this thing that sounds really big and scary, go do it now, right? So who is in scope? We covered that one. Why is this important? I mentioned our first partner, security. They come through, we start getting through the requirements and they go, great. The first thing we need to write down is why we're doing this. And they went, because we're security. And I went, right, why are we doing this? And they go, because security is important to the business. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be a while, right? We got there. And now they're actually, again, our like premier customer that we like to hold up and go, they can describe why this is important besides, vulnerability, right? When is this happening? When is this due? How long do you have? What are the requirements? How do I meet the requirements? And of course, the important part is, after I did the thing, how do I know that it worked? And you're not gonna come back in 2 weeks and go, wrong, do it all over again. Okay, the next part of our flywheel is the data source, right? Our catalog. So going back to that idea of scoping and knowing who to target and how to target them, this goes back to understanding that domain and the data associated with that domain, what components are in scope, and in many cases, understanding the source code itself. We also want to tie back these changes to the broader business metrics, right? So we look at that in relation. So some insights, as we mentioned, are more relevant to, say, a mobile team. Others are, front-end related or back-end related. Even if it's back-end, this might be, like I mentioned, JDK 25 upgrade, great. But that doesn't affect every single developer. So how do we make sure that we're not, again, being super, super noisy? So this all comes back to accurate ownership and attribution. So for us, a lot of times it starts at the component itself and then defining what that component is. You heard yesterday, I think it was Netflix talking about like a SBOM and using that as kind of that core definition. Same, right? Not unique. But that component also has dependencies, right? This could be a service with underlying dependencies. We want to be able to not just have that bill of materials, but also be able to attribute that across the board in terms of associations from component to component. That component also might be running in production. What does that look like? Is it running in multiple regions? Is that on one platform or another platform? So understanding the cloud resources that are associated with this. And of course, where is all the code stored in the first place? Do we have a good understanding of that code? And then all of the different pieces that go along with that, like our build plans. And then most importantly, who owns this thing? Which head of engineering and engineers am I going to go talk to? So we need to understand not only the attributes, but the associations across these different components so that we can accurately target teams with the right insights. Cool. But how do, again, we know that the change worked? And how do we know that you were non-compliant in the first place and needed to make this change? So we have a system that we built that we call asset readiness. So asset readiness, really under the hood, I would call it a rules engine, right? It's an evaluation system, so we define each of these requirements as a set of controls. We evaluate the state of your component and its metadata with said controls to understand whether you are compliant or not, right? Nothing crazy there. We can run these rules checks however frequently we want. For the most part, every 24 hours, but we could sync this more frequently. And then ultimately, all of this gets visualized for you in a scorecard. So that way you don't have to write a bunch of queries to be able to see this data and to understand whether or not you're compliant. Interventions. Okay, so this is the interesting part and sometimes like spicy depending on who you're talking to. How do you intervene if they're not doing what you want them to do, right? What does that look like? So let's say, maybe this is like a huge, big migration. And it's going to take like 2 years end to end to get everybody from A to B. Okay, we're probably not going to start with like blocking deployments, right? Maybe not, right? So we can start with some of these very softball interventions of like Slack reminders, putting a Jira ticket in their backlog, right? Annotating PRs with things that need to change. But we can also escalate as necessary, right, to more severe interventions, again, where appropriate. And that's the very important thing here, where appropriate. So This is something that we work with our domain experts on up front as part of that intake and understanding how we want to scope and drive this campaign. So this is, again, kind of an underlying diagram to explain, but this is an example of an intervention strategy where we go, okay, at point number 1 in time, we're just going to do this one thing. We're going to, I don't know, show on your PR that you're not compliant. Great. Okay, well, 3 months later, if you're still not, then we're going to put a Jira ticket in your backlog, right? And then it's 3 months, and we can effectively have this cascading point all the way towards like, hey, you had 2 years to do this thing. You're not doing this thing. You're forcing us to this drastic measure, which almost never happens. We're going to now block your deployment. When would we ever start with something like that? As you can imagine, it tends to be like that log4j type scenario. We go, oh shit, you need to make a change. Oh, was I allowed to say that? Oh well. Oh shit, you need to make a change like right now, tonight, right? And we're going to take whatever extreme measures are necessary to make sure that that happens because this situation is so severe, right? That can happen. I don't think that's ever really happened for us. This has been a pretty effective way, and we haven't run into that since then. Another thing to keep in mind here is, I'm talking all about this from like the team perspective, right? Of like, oh, I'm gonna like make sure that this one team and this engineering manager, this head of engineering knows. But for a lot of these changes, especially these very wide-ranging, large-scale changes, for us at least, tend to have like very top-level visibility. Well, how we present some of this data to an engineering manager doesn't necessarily probably the same way that we want to show this to, say, our CTO. Right? Or to the head of all products. So we need to think a lot about how we are visualizing and representing this data. So for example, we tend to show scorecards to the individual teams of here's all the requirements you're not meeting. But when we first started this, and I'm standing in front of the CTO going, well, Rajiv, here's this scorecard, and here's how we're compliant for CI/CD standards, and here's this other scorecard, and here's how we're compliant, and here's this other one, and here's this other one, and here's this other one. He just went, cool, so exactly where are we at the end of it, right? After I quoted like 95 numbers to him. So that's where we, for example, invented a totally different metric for him that we call our fragmentation score that helps him understand at a very high level how fragmented are we from all of the different requirements or these different asks that we've asked teams to do. Effectively, how off the golden path are they, right? That is very different than the way that we talk about this with our individual teams, right? So keep in mind your personas because it will definitely change how you talk about and how you represent some of this data. All right, on to Act 3. So far it sounds amazing, right? We solved the problem. All right, so we have made a huge amount of progress, okay? For the campaigns that we have run since we've put this whole system together, we've had over 2x increase in adherence. And in terms of the targeting of the teams themselves, it's been pretty much 100%. Whereas before, it was like screaming into the void, and you might get like 10% of teams to do something. Now we're getting engagement and action from about 100% of the teams that we're engaging. Now that doesn't mean they're fixed at day one, but they're at least going into the campaign, looking and understanding. Okay, that's awesome. Next thing would be this idea of interventions. So just having the campaign and then reminding people every 2 weeks in their fortnightly ritual wasn't really enough, right? We need to kind of have these nudges along different intervals or different milestones of this change that we were driving. So interventions really helped us close some of that communication loop after that first blast, right? Because we're all busy. So 2 years ago when I screamed to Preeti, please migrate off Bitbucket data center to Bitbucket cloud, she was like, yeah, I'll do that next year, and then totally forgot about it, right? So we need to continue to have that conversation, continue communicating and targeting teams throughout. And we saw, again, like with our interventions, that this really helped shorten our campaign cycle time. And another thing that helped shorten our campaign cycle time, well, I'll frankly say is like a great partnership with our products. So we put a lot of this in our product compass. I'm not trying to sell you on this, but the reason I'm bringing that up is like without them having a stake in the game, I don't know that we would have been as effective, right? Because this enabled them to also put things in the product that they were building to make it easier for teams. So again, one of the ways that we shortened this idea of the campaign cycle time was for really simple changes, just being able to do it right from the scorecard. And that ended up reducing, for those types of like small changes, getting them done in less than 14 days from the time that it was communicated to the time that we closed the campaign, compared to what generally took us like 6 months in the past, and 6 months of going door to door begging, Albert, please just just please add this one file to your repository, pretty, just this one, and then being like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna raise a bunch of PRs and do it for you. And then, 6 months later, it still hasn't been merged. So a lot of these like easy changes and being able to automate them directly from where the developers were, very impactful for us. But really, there's still a long way to go before we get to where we want to be. So we've been thinking about this like a multi-year step change program because we are effectively changing in many ways the way that we work, right? We're changing the way that we communicate, the way that we plan, the way that we prioritize, right? A lot of these sort of like softer process things that then affect how we're building the software. So for us, Act 1 or year 1 was really around what we called our flywheel foundations. So cool, we have a service catalog, but do we know all of our software? Cool, we have EC2 instances, but do we have all of our cloud resources cataloged? Right, so first was getting to 100% inventory, right, was year 1. We also went, how are we gonna even evaluate whether they're compliant or not? So investing in some of that evaluation rules engine, asset readiness, that was very important for us. And then how do we even get insights in front of teams? So for us, it started with TechOps, right? That was like this one place that we knew that teams were going to look, right? That fortnightly ritual. But we also knew up front that that was not enough, but it was a start. So once we got those foundations in place, great, that gave us something that we could then continue to build on. So I mentioned this idea of like campaigns becoming a noun. So once that we had, in some cases built some of these foundational systems, in other cases kind of evolved and enhanced these systems, then it became now how do we make campaigns the unit of change that every single system understands and uses, right? So this is where we started putting this in Compass. We started putting this in asset readiness. We started thinking about this when we communicated and planned with our domain experts on what a change would look like. This also became, again, unit of change for interventions and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that we did in phase 2 very heavily was focus on these foundational standards as well. That will enable us to do more and more automation of these changes in the future. So getting, a little bit more standardized on some of our tech stacks, getting some of, our repositories all in the same places, that type of I will call it kind of cleanup in some ways. That gave us a little bit better governance and control to then be able to unlock a lot of automation as we move forward. So number 2 was really about nailing the awareness and nailing the action. And I think we did that. Which brings us into phase 3, which is where we are now. And this is where we want engineering teams to use the flywheel to execute fleet-wide code changes. Not just awareness, not just action, but actually just doing it for you as much as possible. Notifying you that we're gonna do it, doing it, and then notifying that we did it and it was successful. That's where we're moving our flywheel to. We've already seen very early successes with automating some of our code changes around things like UI styling, as well as our tech stacks, and we look to continue to build on that as we move forward. But this is not easy for a couple of reasons. So for us, I don't know, did you guys hear anything about Atlassian in the news this week? Or like last week? I don't know, or the week before that. There's been a lot of acquisitions that we've made. And in fact, we grow primarily, I would say, through acquisition, which means that we have a huge amount of diversity in our tool chain. We have a huge amount of sprawl and fragmentation. I can't tell you since the DX acquisition got announced how many times that guy right there has said, ha ha ha, are you ready for Ruby on Rails support? And I'm like, no, right? So more and more gets introduced on a, honestly, regular basis when it comes to Atlassian growth. And so we need to be able to manage and effectively contain the sprawl. The other thing is, as we're driving more and more into being able to just do it for you, that means that we need to be able to do it for you safely. Because the last thing I want to happen is cause an incident. And then what's going to happen? No one's ever going to use our engineering health flywheel again, right? So we need to build trust with our customers, but also that means that we need to be able to trust that these changes are going to happen and happen in a safe way. So this is a combination of good guardrails, but this also means that we need to have, guess what, like a campaign focusing really on starting to drive better tests and more confidence in our tests and increase our test strength. So that way we feel a lot better about being able to drive these changes for you. And then of course, the last thing is does everybody use the flywheel today? No. In fact, if you can remember those like random bubbles of things that I had on there, those are our key partners. So our friends in SRE and reliability in our core engineering group, they're a customer of ours. Security, probably our biggest customer, and they roll like lots of changes. We are our own customer. We own the software development lifecycle for Atlassian. We own fixing developer productivity for Atlassian. We also are using this as well as more and more of our stakeholders. But getting them to use it, do you remember that list of questions? One of them was, why are we doing this? Let me tell you, when you start with that question, why are we driving this change? And you're telling them to justify it up front, not everybody wants to partner with you. Right? Because they're like, I just want this change to happen. Why do I have to justify it? You're like, whoa. Don't justify it to me. We need to justify it to the developers, because every single one of you, myself included, when I get this like thing coming at me that says, do it, I go, why? Right? So that's the first question that we need to be able to answer is why? Why does this matter? Why should you prioritize it? Why should you do it? And not everybody wants to justify, to be honest. They want to just go do it and it happen. So influence, we're continuing to prove that value over and over to the company to get more folks to buy in. And so we have, again, seen a huge amount of value for this. This is driving a lot of code changes across Atlassian. This is ultimately a positive feedback loop that helps our teams be continuously improving their engineering maturity. So we have data relating to standards that's being actively collected and fed into different mechanisms to drive interventions and action. And mechanisms, this word I used, translating that data into insights, raising that awareness, and then of course, intervening at the right place, right time, right, to help nudge you along whatever this change is. And then as teams adopt these requirements, the impacts then resonate in that standards data, which we then tie back to that why. Why are we doing that in the first place? There's usually some sort of business metric or a goal or something associated with it. So then when we get to the end of the campaign, what would have happened 4 or 5 years ago, we would have been, everybody's on Kubernetes, yeah, done. But why should I care? Like, why does that matter that everybody's on Kubernetes? Do we save money? Is it better performance? Is it better developer experience? Like, why? Right? We tended to just be like adoption rather than what is the actual business value or reason. So this is a big part of this for us, was being able to tie that type of data back to the underlying goal. Okay, that's what I have for you. What do you have for me in terms of questions?